By dawn, the ring on her finger would feel like a curse. The chapel was too bright for the kind of fear sitting inside it. Crystal chandeliers poured warm light over white roses and polished marble, over silk dresses and tuxedos that cost more than most people's rent. A string quartet played like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. The air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh lilies, but underneath it, underneath everything, was the quiet scent of panic. Not the loud kind, the controlled kind. The kind people wore behind smiles. The kind that made mothers grip their handbags too tightly and made grown men swallow like they were trying to hide the sound of their own heartbeat. Whispers moved through the pews like a sickness. She's really doing it. Is she insane? Everyone told her not to. I heard he doesn't even sleep. He just watches. The bride stood at the end of the aisle, framed by tall doors and winter sunlight spilling in behind her. A veil softened her face. A long train of satin followed her like a warning. And still she smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a desperate one, a quiet, certain smile. As if she had already survived something worse than judgment. Her hands were steady on the bouquet. Her shoulders were straight. The only betrayal came from her eyes. Because her eyes kept sliding toward the front row, toward the empty space beside the groom's chair where a normal man's family would sit instead. There were guards, no uniforms. No badges. Just men with stiff posture, sharp eyes, and the kind of stillness that told everyone they weren't there for a ceremony. They were there for control. A bridesmaid leaned close enough that her breath touched the bride's ear. "Please," she whispered, voice cracking. "It's not too late. You can walk away. Just leave. We'll hide you. We'll." The bride didn't turn her head. Didn't let the smile slip. But her fingers tightened around the bouquet until the stems creaked. "You don't know what you're asking me to do," she murmured back. "I'm asking you to live." The bride blinked slowly, like she was holding tears back without permission. "I am living," she said. "This is the only way I get to keep living." The doors behind her creaked again. A second wave of whispers spread faster than the first, because this time it wasn't rumor, it was presence. Footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Heavy, measured, not rushed, not delayed. The music wavered. Not because the musicians made a mistake, because their hands shook while trying not to. Every head turned, every breath stopped. And when he walked into the chapel, the room reacted like a body recognizing a blade. The Korean Mafia boss didn't need an introduction. He didn't need to announce himself. His presence did it for him. Tailored black suit fit him like a second skin. His hair was neatly styled, not a strand out of place. His face carried no expression except calm, but it was the kind of calm that didn't come from peace. It came from power. He moved down the aisle like he owned the building, the air, the people inside it. Guards at the doors straightened instantly. Men who looked rich and untouchable suddenly looked small. Even the priest faltered, fingers tightening on his holy book like it could protect him. And the bride? The bride didn't flinch. She watched him approach through the thin layer of her veil, her heartbeat loud in her own ears, her pulse jumping at her throat like it wanted to escape. The groom stood at the altar, perfectly still, like a statue trying to pretend it was human. He was handsome in a polished, corporate way. The kind of man who belonged in magazines. His smile didn't move when the boss arrived, but his eyes did. His eyes filled with something ugly, something scared. This wasn't surprise. This was recognition. The boss stopped at the front row, turning his gaze to the bride first, not the groom. His eyes were dark and unreadable. But there was a pause, a fraction too long, as if he wasn't seeing a bride, as if he was seeing an answer to a question he hadn't asked out loud yet. The bride walked forward anyway. Step, step, step. Each step was a decision. Each step silenced another warning. When she reached the altar, the priest cleared his throat twice before words finally returned to him. We are gathered here." The bride barely heard him. Her world had narrowed to the space between her and the man who had turned the room into a cage without touching a single lock. "Do you?" the priest began, voice trembling. "Do you take this man?" A muffled sound rose from the guests. Stifled sob. A whisper of "don't." The bride inhaled slowly. Then she spoke before the priest even finished. "I do." The words landed like a gunshot. The groom blinked, shocked, like he hadn't expected her to say it that fast. Like he'd been waiting for hesitation. Like he'd been counting on fear to save him. But she didn't hesitate. The boss took one step closer. Close enough that the bride could smell him. Clean, cold, expensive, close enough that even the groom stiffened. The boss leaned toward the bride's ear, voice low enough that it didn't travel, and the bride's smile finally cracked at the edges when he whispered something only she could hear, something that made her blood run cold. Something that sounded like a promise. And a sentence. The first private moment as husband and wife didn't feel like romance. It felt like being escorted into a room where the air itself belonged to someone else. The ceremony ended the way storms end. Quietly, but with damage no one could fix. People clapped because they were supposed to. The priest smiled because his mouth remembered how. Cameras flashed, catching her bouquet, her ring, her veil, her perfect posture, her perfect lie. Then the guests were dismissed like background noise, and the Mafia boss didn't even have to say goodbye for them to scatter. No one dared hold him for small talk. No one dared touch her arm and pull her aside. Even her bridesmaids stood frozen in the aisle as she was guided out, not by family, but by men in suits who moved like trained shadows. The limousine door opened. She stepped in first, lifting her dress with careful fingers. She didn't look back. The door shut behind her with a soft click that sounded too final. He sat across from her, not beside her. He didn't crowd her. Didn't reach for her hand. Didn't lean in to claim a kiss for the cameras. He simply watched her the way a man watches a safe that contains something valuable and fragile. She tried to keep her breathing steady. Her chest didn't listen. She kept her smile in place. Her pulse betrayed her anyway. The car rolled forward through Seoul's glittering streets, the city flashing past the tinted windows like a world that had no idea what it had just witnessed. She could feel the ring on her finger like a weight she hadn't earned. The Mafia boss finally spoke, voice low and calm, as if they were discussing the weather. "You said it quickly." His words weren't accusation. They were observation. She didn't answer at first. She stared at the dark glass, watching her reflection shake slightly whenever the car hit a bump. "If I waited," she said carefully, "someone might have tried to stop me." A pause, then his mouth curved, not into a smile, but into something almost close. "They did try." Her throat tightened. "And you let it happen." "I watched," he corrected, "to see if you would still walk forward." She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. And you did." His gaze dropped briefly to her hands. Her fingers laced tightly together in her lap, knuckles pale from pressure. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. The sight of her fighting herself was enough. Then his voice softened. "Your hands are cold." The kindness should have relieved her. It didn't. It scared her more than cruelty. Because cruelty was predictable. Cruelty had rules. Cruelty would have matched the stories people told. But gentleness. Gentleness from a man like him felt like a knife hidden under velvet. She forced a shrug. "It's winter." His eyes didn't move. "It's fear." She hated that he saw it so easily. "I'm not afraid," she lied. His gaze lingered on her mouth like he could taste dishonesty. Then he looked away, toward the window, toward the city he owned in ways money couldn't explain. "Good," he said. "Because fear makes people run." Her stomach dropped slightly at the last word. Run. The car turned through a private gate. Lights swept over the windshield. A wall rose ahead, high, flawless, silent. Security cameras rotated like eyes. Guards stepped aside without being told. The mansion came into view, massive and calm, sitting behind iron gates like it was built to survive wars. She had seen the outside before, from far away. In articles she pretended not to read. Now she was being brought inside it like a secret that belonged to him. The car stopped. The chauffeur opened her door. Cold air rushed in. She stepped out, heels touching stone so clean it looked unused. He got out after her, jacket still perfect, hair untouched by wind, as if the world didn't dare disturb him. He didn't offer his arm, she didn't ask. They walked through the front doors into warmth. Soft golden light, silent hallways, polished floors that reflected their figures like mirrors. Somewhere in the distance, water moved. Somewhere closer, a clock ticked too loudly. She felt exposed. Not because the staff stared. They didn't. They lowered their eyes so fast it was almost painful to witness. That was worse. It meant they knew what he was. And they knew what she had become. He stopped in the center of the main hall. The doors behind them closed with another quiet click. She turned her head, just slightly, and caught sight of them. Thick, heavy, expensive wood. Locks embedded into the frame. Not decorative. Not for show. His voice came from behind her shoulder, calm enough to sound gentle. "There's one rule," he said. She swallowed. "What rule?" He stepped closer, not touching but close enough that she felt his warmth at her back. "You never leave my sight," he murmured. "Without my permission." Her breath caught, sharp and unwanted. She made herself turn, lifting her chin like she was still in the chapel. Like she still had choices. "What if I don't ask?" His eyes didn't change, his voice didn't rise. It got quieter. "Then you won't leave." The silence that followed was heavy, thick, absolute. And when she glanced again at the doors, she understood something her mind didn't want to accept. She didn't hear a lock turning. She didn't hear chains, she didn't see guards move. But she knew those doors didn't open from the inside. She didn't sleep the first night. Not because he touched her. Not because he threatened her. But because the silence in his mansion didn't feel empty. It felt loaded. Like it was holding its breath, waiting for her to make the first mistake. She lay on the edge of a bed that was too large and too soft, wearing a robe that smelled like expensive soap and someone else's idea of comfort. The room was beautiful in a cold museum way. Polished furniture, heavy curtains, dim lights that made everything look like a scene in a film where nobody survived the ending. Across the room, the door stood shut. Quiet. Perfect. But she could feel what it meant. She didn't know what time it was when she finally sat up. The moonlight bled through a gap in the curtains, carving pale lines across the carpet like prison bars. Her phone sat on the bedside table where she'd placed it carefully, face down like she could hide from it, like she could hide from herself. When she flipped it over, the screen lit up instantly. No missed calls. No messages from friends. No congratulations texts. Because she didn't have those people. Not anymore. She scrolled anyway, her thumb moving like a habit she couldn't break. Old contacts. Old names. Old numbers. Blocked. Some deleted. Some still there like ghosts she didn't have the courage to bury. Her chest tightened when she reached her mother's name. She didn't click it. She hadn't spoken to her in almost 3 years. Not since the last time she begged for help and heard, "You always bring trouble. You were born carrying it." She exhaled slowly, forcing the memory down like swallowing glass. That was the thing about survival. People thought it looked brave. They didn't know it looked like this, lying awake in a stranger's mansion, wearing a ring that could buy a house, while your hands still trembled like you were back in a one-room apartment counting overdue bills. She pulled her knees up to her chest and stared at the ceiling. Her mind tried to run away. But it always circled back to the same question. Why did you marry him? The answer wasn't simple. It wasn't romance. It wasn't greed. It wasn't even desperation. Not in the way people like to gossip about. It was fear, yes, but not of him. Fear of what came before him. Because before the Mafia boss there was the debt. The kind that didn't belong to banks. The kind that belonged to men who smiled while breaking your life into pieces. Before the Mafia boss, there was her father's funeral. Cheap coffin. A landlord pounding on the door for rent money she didn't have. A stack of papers she signed without reading because her hands were shaking too badly to hold the pen steady. Before the Mafia boss, there was the night she realized love didn't protect women like her. Just made them easier to trap. She remembered the first warning clearly. Not from strangers. From a woman in her workplace who grabbed her arm so hard it left fingerprints. "You don't marry men like that," the woman had hissed. "Men like that don't have wives. They have property." She'd smiled back, polite and calm, like she didn't feel sick inside. Like she hadn't already made her decision. Because the truth was, she didn't pick him because he was the most feared man alive. She picked him because he was the only man powerful enough to make the fear stop knocking at her door. She picked him because monsters were the only thing other monsters respected. That was the bargain she made with herself. Marry the storm. So the wolves outside won't touch you. And for a moment it worked. The pressure eased. The shadows faded. The calls stopped coming. Even the air felt lighter, as if her life had finally agreed to let her breathe. Until tonight. Until the mansion. Until the locked doors. Until the reminder that escape always comes with a price. Her phone vibrated suddenly. Once. Dark. Her whole body froze. Slowly, she lifted it again, and the screen showed one new message. No contact name. No number saved. Just words. You thought marriage would hide you. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. Her fingers went numb. She reread it. Once. Her throat tightened as if invisible hands were squeezing it shut. Because that wasn't a random threat. That wasn't a spam text. That was someone who knew. Someone who had been watching her long enough to wait until she felt safe. She tried to breathe, but the air wouldn't go in properly. Her gaze snapped to the window. The curtains were thick, but she moved anyway, crossing the room on bare feet, silent like she'd learned to be. She pulled the curtain back just enough to see outside. The estate grounds stretched wide and empty under the night sky. Security lights glowed along the walls. Guards moved in the distance like shadows on duty. And near the front gate, far enough to be mistaken for a statue if you weren't looking closely, there was a figure standing still, watching. Not inside. Not yet. But close enough to prove something terrible. She wasn't hidden. She was found. He didn't knock when he entered. He didn't need to. The door opened with a quiet click, and the air in the room changed, like the house itself recognized who was walking through it and straightened its spine. She spun around too fast, the curtain still half in her hand, her heart beating like it wanted to break free. For a second she forgot the robe, forgot the ring, forgot the bed that wasn't hers. All she saw was him. The Korean Mafia boss stood in the doorway dressed like he'd never been off duty. Dark shirt. Tailored trousers. No jacket, yet the room felt colder anyway. His hair was neat, his face unreadable. His eyes calm in the way deep water was calm, right before it swallowed you. He didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just looked at her hand gripping the curtain like it was a weapon. Then his gaze lifted, slow, measured, following the line of her fear straight to the window. He walked closer without hurry, and behind him, two guards appeared like shadows that had been waiting for permission to exist. Both men wore earpieces. Both had the still posture of people trained to shoot without shaking. She swallowed hard. "Hi." Her voice cracked. She hated that it cracked. "Someone's out there." "I know," he said. Just 2 words. Not comfort. Not surprise. Certainty. He reached past her, not touching her skin, but close enough that she felt the heat of him. He pulled the curtain fully back, exposing the glass. The estate grounds lay open beneath security lights, the gate in the distance standing like a mouth that never closed. The figure near the gate was gone. But she didn't feel relief. She felt worse. The boss's eyes tracked the dark space outside like he was reading a message written in movement. His jaw tightened once. Not anger. Control. He turned his head slightly, and one of the guards stepped forward instantly. "Lock the east corridor," the boss said, voice low. "Switch cameras 3 and 7 to manual. I want live feed on every entry point." "Yes, boss." The guard didn't run. He didn't panic. He moved like this was routine, like the entire mansion had been built for nights like this. She stared chest tight. "You have cameras everywhere." He glanced at her once, like she'd just noticed the sky was blue. "This isn't a home. It's a fortress." That word hit harder than it should have. Fortress. That meant there were enemies. That meant there were wars. That meant she had married into something far worse than rumors. He walked past her, and she followed without thinking, bare feet silent on thick carpet. In the hallway, the mansion looked different in the dim light. Less luxury, more machine. Motion sensors blinking faintly. Doors with keypad locks. Security panels tucked behind art pieces. Even the silence wasn't peaceful. It was enforced. As they moved, staff members appeared, but none of them looked her in the eyes. A woman carrying folded linens froze when she saw the boss, then bowed quickly and stepped back like she'd been trained to disappear. Fear lived here like a second language. The boss didn't raise his voice once. He didn't have to. Every person around him moved like the sound of his breath was an order. She hugged the robe tighter around herself. "Why are they here?" she whispered. "Who is watching me?" He stopped at the end of the corridor where a wall of screens glowed behind a hidden panel. CCTV footage from the gate, the gardens, the outer wall, the driveway, a drone angle above the estate like the eye of God. His gaze flicked across every feed, sharp and methodical. Then he looked at her again. And for the first time she saw it, something dangerous under his restraint. Not desire, not cruelty. Possession, yes, but not the childish kind. The kind that came from ownership and responsibility. Like if she broke under his roof, it would stain his name forever. "You shouldn't have been found," he said softly, like he was talking to himself. Her throat tightened. "I didn't do anything." "I know," he replied. That was the terrifying part. He wasn't accusing her, he was calculating what her existence meant. She took a shaky breath. "Why do you keep checking exits?" His eyes didn't leave the screens. "Because they don't come for what they don't want." Then quieter. "And they want you." The words stole her breath. Before she could speak, a door opened behind them, and his right-hand man stepped in fast, face drained of color. He didn't bow. He didn't hesitate. He walked straight to the boss and said the sentence that made her blood turn cold. "Boss, they found her." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed in the room like a bullet that hadn't hit yet. The boss didn't move at first. He didn't curse. He didn't ask questions. He only stared at the screens, as if he could see the future hiding between the camera angles. Then he exhaled once, slow, controlled, and the mansion around them seemed to inhale with him. "How?" he asked. His right-hand man swallowed. "East perimeter. 2 minutes ago." Camera 7 went dark for 3 seconds. 3 seconds. To her that sounded like nothing. To him, it sounded like a war declaration. The boss's eyes shifted to the guard beside the security wall. "Seal the estate." The guard nodded and touched his earpiece. No emotion. No urgency. Only obedience. Lights outside brightened. Floodlights. Motion sensors. The kind that didn't just detect movement. They punished it. She stood frozen in her robe, feeling suddenly stupid for thinking a mansion could ever be safe. Safe didn't exist here. Not in a place built by a man like him. "Stay behind me," he said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even protective. It was ownership dressed as discipline. She opened her mouth to protest, because she was tired of being ordered by men who believed her fear was the same thing as her consent. But then she heard it, a sound like fabric brushing against a wall. Quiet. Too quiet. As if someone had trained their footsteps to disappear. The boss turned his head, just slightly, toward the corridor, and she understood, in the worst possible way, that he had heard it too. He didn't look alarmed, he looked offended. The right-hand man stepped forward. "Boss!" The boss raised one finger. Silence fell instantly. No shouting. No chaos. Just the heavy pause before something irreversible. She watched him walk down the corridor, calm enough to look bored, while the guards spread out like shadows loosening from the walls. One moved left. One moved right. Another disappeared into a side hallway with a hand already on his weapon. It didn't feel like a rescue mission. It felt like housekeeping. She followed without meaning to, staying far enough back to pretend she wasn't attached to him, close enough to know she'd die faster if she was alone. Then the corridor light flickered, a shadow moved, and the next sound wasn't a gunshot. It was a body hitting the floor hard. Her stomach turned. She stopped breathing. Her hand flew to her mouth, not to scream, just to keep herself quiet enough to survive. The boss stepped into view again, and for half a second she thought nothing had happened, until she saw the blood, not dramatic, not splattered like a movie. Just real. A dark streak on his knuckles. A small stain on the cuff of his shirt. The kind of blood that said someone had been close enough to feel his breath when it ended. His eyes didn't shine with adrenaline. They were blank, cold and clean, like the lights in a hospital hallway. Two guards dragged someone across the marble floor. Man. Hooded. Struggling weakly. Breathing hard like he'd been running from his own death and still lost. The boss crouched in front of him, slow and patient. "You came into my home," he said calmly. "At night." The attacker shook his head violently. I didn't want to, I swear." The boss tilted his head as if he was listening to a boring excuse. "Who sent you?" The attacker's eyes flickered past him toward her. And his face changed. Not relief, recognition. His mouth opened, and the name that came out wasn't the one anyone called her here. It wasn't the one written on her papers. It wasn't the one attached to her marriage. He begged with her real name. The name she buried, the name she killed. "Please," he sobbed, shaking so hard his teeth clicked. "Please, I didn't know you were here." Her real name. "I didn't know." Everything inside her went cold. The boss didn't react loudly, he didn't even blink, but the air around him tightened like a noose. Slowly, she stepped back, her hands trembling at her sides, and when she finally spoke, her voice barely existed. "That name," she whispered, staring at the attacker like he'd just pulled her grave open. "That name shouldn't exist anymore." The boss didn't look at her when she whispered, he looked at the attacker, like the name had confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Say it again," he told the man on the floor. His voice stayed low, almost patient. "The name." The attacker shook his head violently. Tears ran down his face into the hood. Please." The boss leaned in closer. "You recognized her. That means you weren't here to rob me." A pause. "You were here to collect her." The attacker's breathing turned into ugly panic. "They told me she'd be alone. They told me she was still at the house." "Whose house?" The attacker hesitated for half a second too long. That was all it took. The boss stood up slowly, and the guards tightened their circle. The hallway lights made his shadow stretch across the marble like something living. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. He simply turned his head toward her, and she felt the weight of him land on her like a hand on the back of her neck. "Come," he said. She wanted to refuse, not because she was brave, because she was tired of being pulled, dragged, ordered, claimed, moved like a piece on a board she never asked to play, but her legs moved anyway. Because his mansion didn't feel like a mansion anymore. It felt like a locked room in the middle of a city that had already chosen her fate. He led her into a smaller office off the corridor, a place too clean and too quiet, like it existed just for secrets. A fire burned low in the corner. The air smelled expensive. Wood, leather, something sharp beneath it. He shut the door behind them, not hard, not dramatic. But the click sounded final. For a moment, he didn't speak. He took off his suit jacket carefully and draped it over the chair like he had all the time in the world. Then he walked to the small bar table, poured water into a glass, and held it out. She didn't take it. His gaze didn't change. "You're shaking." "I'm cold." "You're lying." The words weren't cruel. They were accurate. She swallowed. Her throat burned. "I don't know what you want from me." He leaned a shoulder against the desk, posture relaxed, but she'd seen him 2 minutes ago. She'd watched him walk out of violence like it was nothing. Relaxed didn't mean harmless. "I want the truth," he said. "Not the version you practiced in your mirror." Her jaw tightened. "I told you enough." "No," his eyes lifted, pinning her in place. "You told me the name you use now. You didn't tell me the name you ran from." The room turned smaller, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "That name is dead." He nodded once. "Then who killed it?" She stared at him. It was a question no one had ever asked her gently. Every time someone discovered who she really was, it wasn't curiosity. It was control. Her voice cracked. "I didn't have a choice." Something changed in his face. Not sympathy. Not softness. Just attention sharpening, like a blade sliding out of its sheath. He stepped closer, not invading her, but making it impossible to forget he could. "Tell me," he said quietly. "What did you do to survive?" Her chest rose and fell too fast. She tried to keep her expression neutral like she always did. The world punished women who looked weak. Korea punished women who looked afraid. Men like him punished women who looked like they could be broken. But it wasn't working, she whispered. I witnessed something. His eyes didn't blink. What? She squeezed them shut. Just for a second. And when she opened them again, her voice was smaller than she wanted. A man died. Silence swallowed the room. The boss didn't move, but the temperature dropped anyway. Who? He asked. She shook her head fast, panicked. I didn't kill him. I didn't touch him. Just saw it. I saw who did it. And that made you dangerous. Her laugh came out broken. It made me disposable. His gaze lowered to her ring. The one she'd chosen because it looked safe. Normal. A simple circle meant to hide everything under the lie of marriage. You didn't marry for love, he said. You married to disappear. She didn't answer because he was right. He looked away for the first time, like something had annoyed him. Not her, but the world. Then his phone vibrated once. His right-hand man's voice came through the speaker, tense but controlled. Boss, we pulled her marriage file. She froze. What? The boss didn't respond to her. His eyes stayed on the floor like he was already building a grave. Speak. A pause, then. That marriage was never supposed to happen. Her name was flagged. Someone moved the paperwork through 3 offices. It was set up. Her heart stopped. The boss lifted his eyes to hers, and in them was something she'd never seen on his face until now. Not anger, not desire. Not possession, recognition. The kind that said, this was planned long before tonight. He took one slow step toward her, and when he spoke, his voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It turned deadly calm. You weren't hiding from me, he said. You were delivered. Her lips trembled. No, I didn't. He cut her off with one quiet sentence that made her blood run cold. You were sent to me like bait. The first time she understood the city could hate you without ever meeting you. It wasn't in the mansion. It was in the silence afterward. Morning came like it always did. Traffic, cold air, people pretending they weren't afraid of the same shadows. But when she looked out through the bulletproof glass of his upper floor office, Seoul felt different. Like the streets had developed eyes overnight. Not because of her. Because of what she represented. A woman the Korean Mafia boss had let inside. A woman he had moved his men for. A woman he had locked his gates for. In this world that wasn't mercy. It was a message. And the city heard it. She could feel it in the way his staff avoided looking at her directly. Not rude. Not openly hostile. Just careful. Like she was a candle and their lives were made of gasoline. She walked down the hallway in borrowed clothes. Soft sweater, black pants, hair tied back to keep her hands from shaking too much, and the air changed around her. Guards didn't relax when she passed. They tightened. Every door opened early. Every door closed quickly. The mansion didn't feel like safety. It felt like a battlefield where nobody fired a shot. Because everyone was waiting for the perfect moment. She stopped at the edge of the living room where the morning light touched the marble floor. Across the room, his right-hand man stood with a tablet, speaking low. People are talking. The boss didn't look up from the document he was signing. Let them. It's spreading faster than we can bury it. Pen paused. Just once. A small pause, but she caught it. Then the boss continued writing like the paper didn't matter. What are they saying? She asked before she could stop herself. Both men turned slightly, like they'd forgotten she had a voice. The boss's expression didn't shift. Nothing important. His right-hand man hesitated. Then he said it anyway. They're calling you cursed. Her stomach tightened. Cursed, he repeated with disgust, like the word tasted cheap. They think anyone who steps too close to you loses something. She swallowed. Because of what happened last night. No, the right-hand man said, voice flat. Because of what didn't happen. She frowned. He stared at her. You didn't die. The room went cold. She stared at him, trying to understand. That's why they're angry. He didn't answer. The boss finally lifted his eyes, slow and sharp. They're not angry. They're interested. She felt her pulse jump. Interested in what? In you, he said. Then he stood. Not aggressively. Not dramatically. But every guard in the room adjusted immediately like a chain tightening. He walked closer until he was only a few feet away. Close enough that she could see the faint tattoo line rising just above his collarbone, disappearing into his shirt. A mark that made him look even less like a businessman and more like a warning. You were invisible before, he said quietly. That kept you alive. She didn't breathe. Now, he continued, everyone knows I opened my gate for you. Her throat went dry. I didn't ask you to. I know. His voice was calm, but it wasn't soft. It was final. Your existence is a weakness they can touch, he said. And if they can touch you, they can touch me. The words should have made her feel powerful. Instead they made her feel sick. Because being someone's weakness didn't feel like love. Felt like a death sentence. The right-hand man stepped forward. Boss, the council is already questioning it. Your allies are uneasy. Allies don't get uneasy, the boss replied. They get greedy. Then his gaze moved back to her. You need air, he said. It wasn't a question. Minutes later, she was escorted out of the estate. Not like a guest. A cargo. 2 black vehicles. 3 cars of men. Headsets. Quiet hands near holsters. The city passing by outside tinted windows like a movie she didn't belong in. She sat in the back seat, staring at her reflection in the glass. She looked the same. But she wasn't. She was marked. And the city could smell it. They pulled up to a private clinic building, minimal signage, expensive silence. She didn't know why they were here until the boss stepped out first and held the door open for her. His gaze flicked over her face. Stay beside me. Her heart thudded. Is it dangerous? His expression didn't change. That's not the right question, he said. She stepped out anyway. The air outside was cold, sharp, clean, too normal for how wrong everything felt. She took 2 steps toward the entrance, and the world exploded. Not with fire. With movement. A man shoved through the crowd from nowhere, hoodie up, hand rising fast, a gun. Broad daylight. People screamed and scattered. His guards moved like machines. The boss pulled her hard against him, twisting her behind his body in one brutal motion as bullets cracked through the air. She felt the impact shake the ground. She felt the heat of him shielding her. She felt his breath steady against her ear. Not panic. Precision. The shooter didn't get a second chance. A body hit the pavement. A woman's shopping bag spilled oranges across the street like small bright warnings rolling away. Everything went silent again. Too quickly. She stared at the blood, the broken normal life around it. The way the boss didn't even look down at the corpse. He only looked at her. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, grounding her without tenderness. Now you understand, he murmured. Her voice came out shaking. They did this here. His eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, he said. Because they wanted me to see that you're not safe anywhere. She swallowed hard, dizzy. Then she noticed something else. The shooter's face. Not unfamiliar. Not random. One of the guards beside the boss, someone who had been with them since the mansion, was staring at the dead man like he knew him. Like he recognized him. Like he was too still. Her skin went cold. She didn't turn her head. But her eyes shifted just enough. And she saw it. Tiny earpiece. A flicker of communication. Not from outside. From inside. Her mouth went dry as she realized the truth crawling up her spine. The threat wasn't only hunting them. It was walking with them. And in that moment, standing behind the Mafia boss while the city watched, she understood she wasn't his weakness. She was the bait. Again. The clinic's hallway smelled like antiseptic and money. Clean enough to pretend nothing ugly ever happened here. But she could still hear the gunshot in her bones. Still feel the boss's arm locking her behind him like a command. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, everything slowed down. The boss didn't sit in the waiting room. He stood near the window like he owned the sunlight. His guards formed a quiet perimeter, eyes scanning every reflection, every door. Nobody spoke unless spoken to. No drama. No apology. Just the heavy calm of people who knew how fragile life was. She sat on the edge of a leather chair, hands clasped so tightly her nails bit into her skin. Her body was shaking now that it was allowed to. The fear she'd swallowed all night had finally found a crack. "That man," she whispered. "He tried to kill me." The boss didn't turn around. "He tried to kill me," he corrected, voice low. "You were the message." She stared at his back, at the line of his shoulders under the black coat, at the faint neck tattoo that made him look like he belonged to the dark, not daylight. "So what am I supposed to do?" Her voice wasn't angry. It was exhausted. "Am I supposed to hide behind you forever?" He finally faced her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were too sharp to be gentle. "No," he said. "You're supposed to live." She let out a bitter breath. "That's easy to say when you're you." His gaze didn't flinch. "That's why I'm giving you a choice." The words landed wrong. Not because she didn't want a choice. Because nothing in his world came with freedom. Came with a price. "A choice," she echoed, slow. "From you." He walked closer, stopping at a respectful distance, like he was forcing himself to remember she wasn't an object. "You leave," he said. "Right now. My men will take you anywhere you want. Another city. Another country. New documents. A new life." Her throat tightened. It sounded like rescue, but it felt like a goodbye said with a gun still pointed. "And if I leave?" His jaw flexed once. "They'll find you," he answered. "Not because you're important. Because you're mine." The word made her stomach twist. It wasn't romantic. It was ownership dressed in protection. "I'm not yours," she said, voice shaking but clear. The boss stared at her like he'd been slapped with truth. Then, to her shock, he didn't argue. "I know," he replied quietly. "That's why I'm offering instead of taking." Silence sat between them, thick and sharp. She stood up slowly, her legs weak but stubborn. "You're acting like this is kindness," she said. "But it's not kindness. It's control." His eyes darkened. "Control keeps people alive. Control kills people too," she snapped. Then her voice cracked. "I've lived under men's control before. Didn't protect me. It just delayed the damage." For the first time, something moved across his face. Something close to regret. He exhaled through his nose like he was swallowing a storm. "What do you want from me?" he asked. The words weren't soft. They were real. "Truth," she said immediately. "Not comfort. Not promises. Not money. Truth." His gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. "If you stay," he said, "you don't get to stay as a guest. You stay as a responsibility." "So I become another thing you own," she whispered. "No," he said, voice hardening. "You become the line nobody crosses." She stared at him. Her heart was pounding so loudly it felt like the building could hear it. "Why are you letting me choose?" she asked, quieter now. "You could lock me in one of your safe rooms and call it protection." He didn't smile. "Because I've done that before," he said. "And the woman inside still died." Her breath caught. Not from romance. From the weight of whatever memory had just slipped out. She took a step closer, eyes burning. "Then tell me what you really are," she demanded. "Don't talk to me like I'm fragile. Don't talk to me like I'm lucky. Tell me what you are." He looked at her like he was deciding whether to ruin her life with honesty or ruin it with silence. Then he spoke, voice low enough to feel like a confession and a threat at the same time. "I am the reason men disappear," he said. "I am the reason families stay quiet. I am the reason the city survives without knowing what it costs." She swallowed, forcing herself not to step back. "And you think marrying me fixes that?" He didn't blink. "I didn't marry you to fix anything," he said. Her stomach dropped. His eyes held hers, steady and brutal. "I didn't marry you to save you," he continued. "I married you to keep you alive." The words didn't feel like love. They felt like a cage with velvet walls. And somewhere deep inside her, fear and relief collided so hard it almost felt like grief. She didn't sleep. Not because the room was uncomfortable. Everything in his house was soft enough to make pain feel expensive. She didn't sleep because outside the walls, the night was moving. And she could feel it. The way you feel thunder before it arrives. The boss had left her in a guest suite that didn't feel like a guest suite. It felt like a locked chapter in someone else's life. The windows were thick. The curtains were heavy. The air smelled like clean sheets and quiet threats. 2 guards stood outside her door without speaking. They weren't there to keep her safe. They were there to make sure she stayed where he could reach her. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in the coat he'd given her, the mansion was awake. Not noisy. Not chaotic. Awake in the way a knife is awake when someone grips it. She found him in the security room. A wall of screens. Cameras from gates, streets, restaurants, hotels, intersections. The city laid out like a map of veins. He was standing in the middle of it, calm, sleeves rolled just enough to show he'd been working. Not with paper but with power. His neck tattoo disappeared into his collar like a warning sign someone tried to hide. "You're doing all this," she whispered, voice raw. "Because of me?" He didn't look away from the screens. "No," he said. "Because of them." Her stomach tightened. "What did they do?" His voice dropped a fraction. "They touched what was under my watch." That phrase again. Under my watch. It should have sounded protective. Sounded like a sentence. She watched him point at a screen. A man near a black car. Another man entering a building through the side entrance. A third one holding a phone like it was a weapon. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said names, locations, orders. And his men moved. It was terrifying how smooth it was. Like this wasn't a crisis. Like this was routine. She turned to leave, needing air. But the door behind her opened before she touched it. One of his guards stepped inside, face tight. "Boss," the guard said, "we found the inside leak." Her heart jumped. Inside leak. The guard hesitated, like he didn't want to speak in front of her. Then he glanced at the boss and kept going anyway. "It's Mincio." The name meant nothing to her at first. Then it hit. Mincio was the only staff member who spoke to her like a person. The only one who'd offered her tea. The only one who'd whispered, "You'll be okay here." Like she actually believed it. "No," she breathed. "That's not possible." The boss finally turned, eyes flat. "Bring her." The word bring made her skin go cold. Not call her. Not ask her. Bring her. 2 minutes later, Mincio was dragged into the room. Not beaten. Not bloody. But shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her eyes went straight to the black woman. Wide, apologetic, terrified. "I didn't have a choice," Mincio sobbed. "They said they'd kill my brother. They said." She choked, tears spilling. "I swear I didn't know they would shoot. I thought they just wanted to scare him." The boss didn't blink. "You gave them her location," he said softly. Mincio's face twisted. "Yes," she admitted. "I did." It didn't feel real. It felt like the world shifting under her feet. The black woman's voice came out broken. "You looked me in my face." Mincio sobbed harder. "I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm sorry." The boss stepped closer, voice quiet enough to be kind if it wasn't him. "You don't apologize to her," he said. "You apologize to the consequences." She turned to him, horrified. "Wait, what are you going to do?" He didn't answer her. He didn't answer Mincio. He looked at his right-hand man and said one sentence that made her stomach drop through the floor. "Make it quick." The room went silent. Mincio screamed. "Please." The black woman's body moved before her mind did. She grabbed the boss's arm, nails digging into his skin. No, her voice shook. Don't do this. His eyes snapped to her, and for a second something dangerous flared, not anger. Not cruelty. Possession. This is what love looks like in my world, he said, voice low. Violence with rules. She swallowed hard, realizing with a sick clarity. This wasn't protection. This was war. And her existence had lit the first match. Then a phone buzzed on the table. A message popped up on the screen. Give her to, and we end this. Morning didn't arrive like a sunrise. It arrived like a verdict. The mansion was still quiet, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. Before, the silence felt controlled, like a room holding its breath. Now it felt finished, like something had already happened in the dark. And the world was just catching up. She stood at the window in his coat, watching the winter fog lift off the garden stones. Somewhere beyond those gates, a city was waking up. People were opening shops, starting cars, pouring coffee, pretending they didn't feel the change in the air. But she felt it, because she knew what his night looked like. Not screaming, not chaos, just men disappearing from streets like they were never born. The message from the enemy still sat in her head like a curse. Give her to, and we end this. She'd expected him to rage, to destroy furniture, to shout orders until the house shook. He didn't. He simply looked at the screen, then looked at her, and the decision was already made. As if the universe had asked him a question, and he'd answered it without hesitation. No, he'd said. One word. Not romantic, not dramatic, just final. And then he'd left. Hours passed without anyone telling her what was happening. That was the worst part. Waiting, knowing that somewhere in the city, her name was being spoken in rooms she'd never seen. People deciding what she was worth. People deciding if she lived. When the door finally opened, she didn't turn right away. She listened first. She listened for his footsteps, for the way the guards shifted, for the subtle changes in breathing that always came before bad news. Then she turned. He walked in like he'd never left. Suit jacket gone. Shirt sleeves rolled up. His hands clean but not soft. The tattoo on his neck was more visible now. Dark ink rising toward his jaw like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there. He didn't look tired. He looked emptied out. His right-hand man stayed by the door, eyes down, posture rigid. He wouldn't meet her gaze. That told her everything. Something permanent had been done. And nobody was proud of it. You're safe, the boss said. His voice was calm, but it didn't carry warmth anymore. It carried conclusion. She swallowed, her throat tight. What did you do? He didn't answer immediately. He walked past her like he needed space to exist. Like standing too close to her might crack something inside him that was already breaking. Then he said, "They won't ask for you again." Her chest tightened. Not relief, something colder. Because she understood what that sentence meant in his world. It meant there was no one left to ask. She stared at him. Mincio. A flicker crossed his face. Not guilt. Not regret. Acceptance. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He only said, "There was a leak." Her voice came out small. She was terrified. His jaw tightened once. Fear doesn't erase betrayal. The silence after that wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. The kind of silence that sits between two people after they've seen the truth of each other, and neither one can pretend anymore. She looked down at her hand. The ring. The wedding ring that had once felt like a dangerous miracle. A warning ignored. A promise made to something she didn't fully understand. Slowly she slid it off. Her skin felt naked without it. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from what the ring meant now. It wasn't romance. It wasn't safety. It was proof. Proof that she had crossed a line most people only read about. She held it in her palm, staring at the shine. Then she closed her fist around it. Not throwing it away. Not giving it back. Keeping it. 'Cause she understood something now. Survival didn't always come with clean hands. Sometimes it came with blood you couldn't wash off, even if it wasn't yours. He watched her quietly. His eyes didn't soften, but they didn't harden either. They just stayed. Like he was letting her have this moment without owning it. "Are you going to regret this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He stared at her for a long second. Then he said, "I already do." Her breath caught. Not because it was sweet. 'Cause it was honest. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him, close enough to feel how much danger lived under his calm. "Then why did you marry me?" she asked. His gaze dropped to her fist, to the ring hidden there. Then back to her eyes. "I didn't marry you because it was safe," he said. "I married you because the storm was coming, and I refused to let it take you." She nodded slowly, tears burning behind her eyes, because she finally understood the truth. Everyone warned her about the Korean Mafia boss. She married him anyway. And by the time she understood what love meant in his world, she had already become part of the storm.